Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for getting out of bed at 9 a.m. Sunday morning. Really appreciate that. My talk is about 4 ways to quit the rat race. And I would like to also get feedback from you during this talk. I'm very interested in what you think about quitting the rat race and why you're interested in it. So first of all, what does the rat race mean to you? Why have you come to this talk? What do you understand by that term, the rat race? Right? Same thing every day, commuting. Anyone else? The daily grind. A job you hate.
Not having the freedom to travel, go where you want, do what you want to do.
Right. Unsatisfying. Yep. The Matrix, yes.
Implicit slavery.
Implicit slavery. Cool. Yep, that all makes perfect sense to me. And what does quitting mean to you? What would quitting the rat race really represent for you? Options? Freedom?
Working remotely from Mexico.
Right, working remotely. Cool.
Congruency between my personal desires in life and what I actually do.
Yes.
40 hours a week or more.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting to do what you really believe in or what you really love.
You wouldn't see it as work necessarily.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I think that all makes perfect sense. And I want to share with you a quote that really sums up the rat race very well for me. This is by Ellen Goodman. Normal is getting dressed in clothes that you buy for work and driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for in order to get to the job that you need to pay for the clothes in the car and the house that you leave vacant all day so you can afford to live in it. That's really what the rat race is, I think. And so what I'd like to do is talk about how I quit the rat race, what my experience is, and then I'd like to share with you other ways to quit the rat race. And I'm very open to questions and so forth as we go through. So I think in terms of what I mean by quitting the rat race, it could mean a number of things, right? I think broadly it could mean no longer having to work in a job you hate. This is what really came up in terms of some of the comments that people were saying. Or more specifically, it could mean no longer having to work in a job. Or I think really specifically, just no longer having to work. Having the freedom to do what you want with your time. And that, I think, is really what I understand by quitting the rat race. So I quit the rat race at age 38. And I'd like to explain a little bit about how I did it. That was 3 years ago, and now I enjoy doing lots of things. You talked about travel. Last winter I traveled around South America with Hannah, and I also played in a jazz band for a year and did lots of gigs and did some improvised comedy and various other things. And the way that I did it was to start a business that produces value. This is an example of some of the kind of analysis of street networks that my business did. We developed computer programs to analyze accessibility in street networks, and we provided consultancy work using this technology. And so I started a business in 2000, and I grew it, and really my route to quitting the rat race was to getting to profit and selling the business. This is a picture of the team on the day that I sold the business, and I was able to sell it to a large engineering company. I had to work for that company for 3 years, and at the end of that earn-out period, that was really when I retired. So having done that, I now live from passive investments. I'm an individual private investor. I don't use brokers. I minimize my expenses. And I follow a strategy for individual investors that's called the permanent portfolio, which was developed by Harry Brown, a famous libertarian thinker and investment advisor. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but it's basically a passive investing strategy that has fixed investments in a number of different asset classes with rebalancing. And I live from those passive investments on a 4% safe withdrawal rate from my portfolio. So that's how I did it. And what I now do is prioritize freedom. I run a podcast called The Voluntary Life, And one of the things that I've done on the podcast is to interview lots of other people about how they found freedom. And in doing so, I met and talked to lots of people who quit the rat race in different ways to me. And I learned a lot about other approaches to quitting the rat race. I started a business and sold it, but other people have chosen different routes. And I've learned a lot of things from talking to people and interviewing people from my podcast. Lots of people quit the rat race, and everyone has their own story. And I'm going to share with you some of the stories that I've learned about from people that I've interviewed and also other people that I've just read about. But looking at all of these stories, I think that they all really can be summarized by 4 basic ways to quit the rat race. And you can combine these different ways, and you can choose some parts of one strategy and with parts of another. But ultimately, you can really summarize quitting the rat race in just 4 ways, I think. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to share each of these 4 ways, how they work, and hopefully you will be able to find that one or more of them resonate more for you with the kind of lifestyle that you would like to live. So just to say a few things about the 4 ways to quit the rat race. What I'm talking about is being financially free. It's not necessarily about being rich, whatever that means to you. In particular, it's not about having a high consumption lifestyle. For me, financial freedom is about the length of time that you have before you have to work in a job that you don't want to do. And the further you can push that length of time out into the future, the more free you are to do whatever you want with your time. And being free to do what you want doesn't mean necessarily sitting on the couch watching TV. If you want to do lots of activities and work that you find fulfilling, great. I think that's awesome. So I'm not talking about how you can just stop doing work. I'm talking about how you can stop doing stuff that you don't want to do and only work on things that you really believe in passionately, that really give you a sense of fulfillment and are in line with your values. So it's about not having to work, not about not necessarily working. And as I said before, the 4 ways that I'm going to talk about are not exclusive. So you can use some of the ideas from each of these ways and combine them together. And I've tried to choose people in my examples who are good examples of one particular route, but a lot of the people that I'm going to mention do also use some strategies from more than one of the 4 ways. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the 4 ways. Does this all make sense so far? Cool. So the 4 ways to quit the rat race, what they're called is just summarized here. What we have is unjobbing, intensive saving, having a passive income business, and selling a business. And what I'll do is go through and I'll talk about what each one of these ways is and explain with some examples of people who actually have done this. And then we can talk at the end about what resonates for you. So first of all, unjobbing. I'd like to tell you about Michael Fogler's story. Michael trained as a classical guitarist, and he always anticipated when he was in college that he would become a teacher. In fact, for many years he tried to be a teacher in a university. He tried to get a job as a classical guitar teacher. There are not many classical guitar jobs in universities. And for a long time, he did odd jobs on the side. He worked on various things to support himself while he was trying to fulfill this idea of a career that he had from the very beginning, that he thought success would mean getting himself into this position where he had a job as a classical music teacher. And years went by, and he ultimately realized that he'd been supporting himself from doing various things for many years, and he never actually had a full-time job. And then he realized that he just didn't want a full-time job, and he chose to work on things that he really believed in. So he became a peace activist, and he did various other things that were meaningful to him. And in order to be able to live that lifestyle, he chose to live very frugally. He lived a very low-cost and low-expense lifestyle. And he's written a book about this called Unjobbing, and I've interviewed him for my podcast. And he coined this term unjobbing to describe this lifestyle. And so this is a one approach to quitting the rat race. And there are many other people who do this. Linda Breen Pierce is another person who has written about this kind of approach to living. She trained as a lawyer and did some similar things to Michael. And someone who's producing a lot of YouTube videos that you may see today, called Elliot Hulse, also has an approach that's very similar to this. He's created something that he calls the non-job manifesto. And it's really about pursuing work that you love and finding a way to make that work. So to summarize what unjobbing is about, it's really about forgetting traditional career steps, giving up on the idea that you have to go through years of doing stuff that you don't want in order to eventually make it, if you like. And the basic idea is just to only ever work on things that you love. And unfortunately, working on things that you love doesn't necessarily pay well. Sometimes it might do, but oftentimes it doesn't. So the approach of unjobbing is really to minimize your expenses in all possible ways, to live an extremely frugal lifestyle with a very low expenditure, and to, in that way, be able to afford to simply work on the stuff that you truly believe in. And a lot of unjobbers also have multiple income streams. They may have various things that they do to support themselves that allow them to live a life that is, as you talked about, congruent with their values. Means that they're working on something that they really believe in. So if you are in a job that you hate and you choose to leave that job and pursue what you love, and you're willing to take the consequences in terms of your income levels and look for unconventional ways to support yourself, maybe through having lots of different jobs rather than one particular job, that's an unjobbing kind of approach to finding a way to escape the rat race. Are there any questions about unjobbing before I go on to the next one? Yes?
With those examples before, I know actually Elliot, kind of familiar with him, and it seemed like he didn't have too much in savings. He kind of lives more from paycheck to paycheck, but though not paycheck, income from his various streams.
Yes.
That seems not to be as secure. You still have to worry a lot about, am I going to have a roof over my head? So
Yeah, that's true. Unjobbing is not a situation where you have investment income that you can live from. You are working, if you like, to support yourself. But the idea is it's not work. It's something that you truly love, right? So if you really love what you do, then there's no problem going to work because you feel passionate about it and you enjoy what you're doing. And that's the unjobbing approach. Now, you're right. There are pros and cons to all of these approaches. You don't have the same kind of financial security in this way. Yeah. You actually do need to be aware that you're going to have to keep finding ways of getting that income in. So there are pros and cons, but it's a lot faster to start unjobbing than it is to do some of the other routes. Okay, we can come back at the end and compare them again. So the next route that I'm going to talk about is intensive saving. And I'd like to share with you the story of Joe Dominguez. He's kind of the first guy to really write about this approach. And he was born in Harlem, and he made it to Wall Street and became a Wall Street trader. And his approach was, he had a very high-paying job, and he simply didn't spend any money. He just saved and saved and saved. And he saved to the point where by the time he was age 30, which was in the 60s, he had the equivalent of about just over 400K in today's money. And what he did was, at that point, he quit. And he lived from the interest on his savings. And he lived, again, similar to unjobbing, a very frugal lifestyle. He had an extremely frugal approach to living. He did not have kind of crazy consumption habits. But what he did was to use that financial freedom to work on things that he truly believed in. So he wrote a book called Your Money or Your Life, and it's a very famous book. And it's the first book that really sort of explained this approach to quitting the rat race. He never worked for money again after he quit. So even though he wrote this book, I believe that the profits went into a charity to further financial education and so forth. And that was the way that he chose to really quit the rat race. And there are many other examples of people who have taken this approach. So Amy Decision is a a writer who wrote a lot about this in the 1990s. She published a journal called the Tightwad Gazette, and she has written a lot about this approach to intensive saving. And in terms of people who are writing about this now, Jacob Lundfisker is a guy who writes a blog called Early Retirement Extreme, and he also did this approach to intensive saving. He was actually working in a university and just had a very, very low consumption rate, had very low expenses, simply saved really intensively. And a guy called Mr. Money Mustache, who writes a very entertaining blog, also had a similar approach, retired in his early 30s from intensive saving. So what is the intensive saving? Well, we're talking about really intensive saving, more than 50% of your income. So the idea is to really focus on saving as much as you can. And given various assumptions about interest rates and so forth, if you save over 50% of your income and are able to live from the rest of the income, then you can retire in about 16 years. If you save 75% of your income, then you can retire in about 8 years. So this is a very, very sort of specific lifestyle choice to really focus on saving. And it's not just that you're focusing on saving to live from what it is that you saved, you're really also relying on the power of compound interest. And so as you may know, you start saving, you put away some money, and that money earns some interest, and then both your initial capital and the interest then earns more interest, and it compounds. And compound interest is really, really a very powerful tool for increasing your savings. And not a lot of people think about this, but for example, if you put away $3,000 every year from when you're 21 years old, and you earn 8% before inflation, not after, but before inflation, which is doable if you have a diversified portfolio, what do you think you get when you're 65 when you retire from £3,000 a year? You're going to have put away just over 100,000 in terms of your actual savings every year. What do you think the compound interest is going to give you? 500,000? It's over $1 million. That's the power of compounding interest. So now, obviously, that's a very long time scale, and that's assuming certain things about what interest rate you're going to be able to get. But this is the basic concept, is that you really focus on intensive saving. And then once you have got to a point where you're able to retire, you live on what's called a safe drawdown rate from your savings. So if you have passive investments like a diversified portfolio or maybe some rental properties and things like that, then a safe drawdown rate is essentially an amount that you can take every year without actually running out of money in the end. It's a sustainable rate. And to cut a long story short, there's a lot of debate about this, but basically the most consensus figure is 4%. You're able to safely take 4% from your savings portfolio because you will earn more than inflation and the 4% to cover that, so you won't be eating into your capital. So that's the basic approach of intensive saving. Any questions about that?
Well, when you talk about saving is also pretty risky because depending on where you put it, it can go away. Especially if you're talking about going to these financial institutions where you send your money away with the promise that someday you'll get it back. And especially in the times that we're living in, I don't want to digress into a completely different conversation, but when it comes to savings, I work for a regular corporation. I have a 401k, but I'm assuming that by the time I turn 65, one way or another, a lot of that's probably not going to be there. It's all stock investments, things like that. I'm not particularly sure about the solvency of our financial system right now. So some suggestions on how to achieve these interest rate or these rates of return through non-traditional investments would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there are real risks, and it is important to look very carefully at that. And that's a big topic.
Right.
I can very briefly tell you my approach, which is one of the really important things about investment and saving is the expenses. That actually a lot of people are interested in saving, and they end up paying brokers and other people a lot in their savings. Unfortunately, you're not going to get a lot of compound interest if you have high expenses. And so my approach is very much to manage my own savings. But I also agree with you that if you simply put all your money in stocks and bonds you may have real problems because there are financial conditions in which both those asset classes will do really badly. So I think it's important myself to have precious metals as well. And I also think there is, there are benefits to holding some of your assets outside your country of origin. So that's a big topic, and I agree that there are risks, but I think there are also ways that you can mitigate those risks. Yes?
I would just point out very, very few people have gotten anywhere close to 8% throughout the last 12 years.
Well, I have. Doing the permanent portfolio, and you can back test it as well. I agree that, stocks have been a disaster over the last decade. And I think there are lots of risks if you have a very concentrated portfolio in one asset class, then that can be a disaster. The permanent portfolio is an idea by Harry Brown where you have a quarter of your savings in stocks, a quarter in bonds, a quarter in gold, and a quarter in cash, and you just rebalance whenever any of those asset classes go above or below a certain rebalancing band in your portfolio. And what you do with that is you actually harvest the volatility within the market. So it doesn't really matter if things are moving around because you're actually making money by buying cheap and selling expensive. So I agree with you that it's not necessarily you're not necessarily going to make 8% before inflation every year. And there are, especially in these times when we have financial repression, where interest rates are being held extremely low, it is difficult. That doesn't mean that you can't make a return. It doesn't mean that you can't look to ways to overcome some of the things that are going on at the moment, like interest rates being held so low. And for example, although stocks did really badly in the last decade, gold was amazing. So,
Gold and cash.
Yeah.
Well, cash has done pretty poorly.
No, yeah, I wouldn't say.
No, cash has done quite well. Yeah, sure. We've been in a deflationary depression. Cash has done well. If you held money in cash, you did better probably almost than if you put it in the bank.
What I would say is that I think there's two questions. One is, are you saving? And the second is, are you getting the returns that you need to? And I think the first thing is, if you're not doing the saving, then you're never going to get the returns in the first place. It is an open question as to how you get the returns. And there are lots of different approaches to that. Yes?
So when you do the drawdown, where does that come from? Is it like whatever needs to be rebalanced in the portfolio, or does it always kind of come out of the cash?
It depends on what asset classes you hold. You will obviously generate interest in some. So if you are holding bonds, then that's going to give you income. If you hold precious metals or something, then you're going to be selling some of that and taking capital gain on what you sell. So yeah, you draw down both from rebalancing and also from the interest that you make on assets that do produce a return. Okay. The next route that I'm going to talk about is passive income. So I'm going to give you an example from a guy called Pat Flynn. So Pat's story is that he was an architectural draftsman, and he was working on CAD and doing all these drawings in an architecture firm, I think. And he was downsized out of a job, and he really didn't expect to be working for himself, but he got downsized out of a job. And as it happens, he had been taking some exams to pass various technical certifications, and he'd made a blog about these exams that he was taking and his revision for the exams and the things that he was learning. And it turns out that his blog was actually very popular, and a lot of people who had to take the same exams were looking at his blog and using it to help them for their own exams. And so, without really planning it, he realized that he had a popular blog, and he added adverts to the blog. And then he started selling ebooks, and then he started selling other products. And he really moved from being an employee to being someone with an online business, selling digital products, and living from passive income. And he now runs a website called smartpassiveincome.com, which you can go to. And this is where he talks about this approach and gives all sorts of examples of how he created passive income and how he does it. And there are many, many other people who do this approach. You've probably heard of Tim Ferriss, and he wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, which was really the first book to sort of write explicitly about passive income. He's a little more complicated because he also sold businesses and did other things too. But that book is very much has been really influential on people's thinking about passive income, especially from online businesses. And there are lots of people who have online businesses who do this. So Laura Roda also has a website doing social media marketing, and that's another example of someone who's sort of running this passive income model. So the idea behind passive income is you do a lot of upfront work to create an automated business. And often that is online. It could be in property, but it's generally these days the easiest way to do it is to have an online business. And you take various routes to minimizing your expenses. One thing that's written about a lot in this field is geo arbitrage, and all that means is really putting yourself somewhere really cheap and selling your digital products to places that you can get good, more expensive, that you can sell expensively. So you might go and live in a low-cost environment, but still sell through the internet to markets that can pay well. And the approach is to really maximize your delegation. And there are lots of ideas about this. Tim Ferriss talks a lot about having virtual assistants. If you have an online business, it's a lot easier to automate things as much as possible. But where you do have to work with people, the idea is you try and maximize delegation. And the plan is really to live from the long-term income that is provided by the business, by the ongoing business. But you quit the rat race because it's a passive income business. You don't have to be there every morning. You don't have to be directing people every day and organizing things every day. You do a lot of work up front to create products that you can sell and scale very easily. And in that way, you give yourself the freedom to do what you want with your day. And so that's the passive income approach. Any questions about that approach?
In your blog, one of the coolest things that I thought you said was how you, in your business or in businesses that you run, you come up with a way to really say what's happening and write all that stuff down. Can you talk to that point, to how you're creating this automated business and what steps that you actually took in your own business to almost turn into a franchise, I think was the terminology.
Well, I mean, I think that the risk with starting a business is that what a lot of people do is recreate their previous job. So maybe they had a particular skill in one area and then they go and work for themselves and they just carry on doing that. And that's not creating a business, that's creating a job for yourself. And as someone once wrote in a book that I found quite funny, that's the worst kind of job because you're working for an insane person, you're like yourself. You've got the worst boss in the world. So the idea really is to make yourself obsolete as quickly as possible and to work on your business rather than in your business. And the way that you do that is by actually changing your mindset to designing a business rather than being the person that everyone comes to within the business to get answers to everything. And that's a big topic in terms of how you go through that, but my focus was really on standardization, proceduralization, and automation, and doing that for all the processes that we did in my business. Yeah. Cool. Right. So lastly, selling a business. And I've talked a little bit about this in terms of my own experience, but I'll just give you another example quickly. This is Derek Sivers' story. Derek was a musician and circus clown, and he wanted to sell his music. As an independent musician, he didn't really know how he could do that. So he wanted to make a website for himself to sell his CDs. And kind of without meaning to, he created CD Baby. So a lot of other independent musicians came to him and said, hey, can you sell my CDs through your website as well? And his business grew until it became the largest online independent music store. And he sold it in 2008 for over 20 million, I think. And he created a charitable trust, which he takes a drawdown, I think, of 4 or 5% each year. And on his death, that charitable trust will go towards independent musicians. And while he's alive, he's living from the income that he created by selling the business. And he now writes about entrepreneurship, and he started various other businesses, and he has a blog about his approach to these things. So he's another example of somebody who took this route of selling a business. Key things about selling a business is that it's really only a viable option if you have a profitable business. This is notwithstanding some strange internet business startup models where there is no profit, but those are so unusual that I think it's better to actually concentrate on the 99% of the world where people actually buy profit in a business. So you have to create a profitable business. You have to really get your business to a point where it is generating profit. And you need to be able to find a buyer. You have to have a business that there is a market for people who could potentially buy your business. In my case, I started a very specialist type of computer modeling consultancy, and I sold it to a large engineering company who wanted to add that skill set and that technical capability to their diverse range of services. And so what you're doing is you're really selling your ownership of the business for a multiple of profits. So for a multiple of it's really about your expected future profits. And what multiple you use is a matter of negotiation and depends on the industry that you're in and can depend on many other things about your business. But essentially, it really comes down to how much profit do you make and how many times that profit is the buyer willing to give you to get ownership of the business. And you may need to stay on afterwards to help integrate your business into whoever buys the business of whoever buys it. I had to stay on for 3 years, which is quite a long time. Some people stay on for a year or so. And then once you've done that, you're back to something very similar to what we talked about with the extreme saving. You get the capital from selling the business, and then you're living from safe drawdown on passive investments. And you're able to do what you want with your time, live according to your values. If you want, maybe start another business or do whatever you like. But that's essentially the route in terms of selling a business. Any questions about that particular route? Yes?
I know folks that have created their own business and they feel like when they walk away or they sell it, the business dies. There's such an effect on the business, their charisma or whatever.
Mm.
Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I think it's extremely difficult to buy a business. I personally have no interest in buying a business because it normally goes wrong. And so, I mean, it's to do it wisely and successfully is very, very hard. I'm very pleased that I sold my business because I was the one actually selling.
But I was referring to when you do create a business and you walk away to a buyer because you sell it, the business doesn't do as well as when you were running.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay. I'm saying it's hard to buy a business successfully because afterwards, you have hopes for how that business is going to perform, and afterwards it often does not work in the way that was expected. And this is a real cliche in large corporate buyouts that everyone expects this is going to be an amazing thing, and it turns out to be a complete waste of money. It's hard to do successfully. Also, there is often a distinction between what people think they're buying and what people think they're selling. So, for example, within a business, you have resources. In my case, the resources were things like the software that we created to do the analysis, and you have procedures, which are the way that you do business, how you deliver that product. And sometimes a company that wants to buy a business is looking at their resources. They think we want that software, but they're not that interested in the procedures because they have their own culture, their own way of doing things. That was the case in my case. I sold my business to a very large multinational consultancy. They did not want our procedures. They wanted us to conform to their procedures. Now, as it happens, we were far more efficient and profitable because we were a small, nimble company, and we sold to a large, lumbering corporation. And unfortunately, they weren't able to keep those procedures because they had an idea about everyone being in one building and everyone using the same IT infrastructure and so on and so forth. So it's very hard to do successfully, and I think ultimately a lot of the problems that come from those kind of cultural differences, that in buying a business, the buyer often wants to absorb that business into their own organization, and they lose the efficiency of the procedures because they think they're buying resources, people and software and stuff like that, but they're actually buying procedures, except that they don't use them and they lose out.
Jake, I'm wondering about your buyer. I mean, how did you find that buyer? Did you work with that buyer? I have a business, and some of the things that I do is I try to find clients and partners that could eventually buy my company and try to understand what they're doing and work more with those types of companies so they could see the value in perhaps taking my company over. Did you have what was your relationship like with your buyer?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And so I sold my business through a trade sale, which for me is by far the preferable way of doing it. I mean, the other way, you can sell ownership through other ways. You can float your business on the stock exchange and various other things. And all the other routes to me look really stressful. Trade sale, I think, is by far the easiest route to sell your business, at least in my opinion. And the trade sale that I did was to a long-time partnering company that we had done a lot of work with. So we, as I said, were a very specialist consultancy doing a very specific thing, and we worked together with this big engineering firm a lot, and they would add us into their projects to provide our specialist expertise. And that was really important because that was a relationship that we built up over years. They could see the value that we were adding to their projects, and so each time they were paying us to come and do something specific. And from their perspective, it was like, well, why do we keep paying these guys when we could actually just have them as part of our team, and then we could offer their services on all projects that we do, and we wouldn't have to pay them so much and so forth. So that was their approach. So I think that partnering with complementary companies that are bigger than you, that have a lot of cash, is a great way to find people who could potentially buy your business. And we did also look, right? I mean, we didn't just stumble across the sale. It doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen, and you have to really plan for it and think about selling. So we really looked at how we could remove barriers to that happening, and we planned it very consciously. So if you want to sell a business, it's like selling anything. You actually have to think about the sale and think about the buyer and think about the value proposition that you're offering and how you're going to make it work. Sure. Well, I'd like to provide some thoughts on these 4 different routes together before we open it up to your comments, because I think they're very different. We talked about some of the pros and cons while going through it, and they do have very different pros and cons, but there are some common features about quitting the rat race using any of these 4 routes. If you're interested in this, I think it's really worth thinking about these common features. The first is that you have to have the courage to be unconventional and to live an unconventional lifestyle. All of these routes are unusual ways to live compared to the debt-ridden, day-by-day jobbing lifestyle that we know is the sort of norm in our culture. So whether it's starting a business or going unjobbing or being an extreme saver, these are all unusual things and unconventional things. And people will frown and raise their eyebrows and so forth. And so you have to have the courage to live unconventionally if you want to do this. All of these routes, in their own way, are about minimizing expenses. And we talked about that in terms of things like, from the extreme savers and unjobbing, living a really low expense lifestyle and really living as cheaply as possible. But even if you're building a business, you really have to control expenses and you really have to manage your expenditure. So all of these approaches, really, you have to take that kind of approach, especially tax. Obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, there's lots of ways that you can minimize your tax burden. If you're an unjobber even, that approach is also about minimizing tax, often by having relatively low incomes and relatively low tax burden or tax bracket because of it. And they're all about creating more than you consume. So all of these approaches depend on you being frugal, creating more value than you actually consume. Again, this is completely against the current sort of cultural norm. And whether that's through extreme saving or through selling a business and then not spending it all on crazy stuff, It's really about creating more value than you consume, saving and being frugal. And another common feature is that you really need networks to do any of these approaches. We like to think of ourselves as rugged individualists. And this is part of our culture, to think of ourselves as individualists. But what's really important in any of these approaches is that it's so vital to cultivate your networks. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you absolutely have to network with people and have to cultivate your relationships. And if you want to be an extreme saver, you have to do the same thing, or an unjobber. If you're going to live from multiple income streams and try and be flexible, you need good networks. You need to be able to trade and interact with people and cultivate your networks. And even if you're an extreme saver, Amy Decision has a nice little story that she talks about in terms of her frugal lifestyle. When her teenage daughter got her ears pierced for the first time, she was going to go to the mall and buy some earrings. And Amy said, "Wait a minute, don't do that yet. Let me see what I can do." So she phoned around her friends and family and asked if anyone had any spare earrings. And by the next day, her teenage daughter had all these earrings, loads and loads of them, because people looked and they had some they didn't need anymore, and suddenly she had like 10 sets. And that's the power of networks and looking after your networks and cultivating your networks. Any of these approaches, you really need to be able to provide value to others and rely on them as well. And the last thing I want to say about it is that I think for any of these approaches, whichever one resonates with you, you have to find purpose in your life choices in pursuing this. There's no point in trying to be an intensive saver if it's going to be a hassle to you and an inconvenience. I think you have to pursue that route if you really find meaning in financial independence, if you really find purpose in that lifestyle. And the same goes for unjobbing, and the same goes for being an entrepreneur, building a passive income business or selling a business. These are all approaches that involve sacrifice to a certain degree. They all involve deferring gratification. And in doing so, if you find purpose in that choice, then you can find joy in it too. It can be a really fulfilling thing to pursue any of these approaches. And not just because you're getting towards the point where you have quit the rat race, but in doing so, in the process of doing so, you're living your values. And that is really rewarding. That's a really meaningful life. So I just want to end with this quote. "We act as though comfort and luxury were the chief requirements of life, when all that we need to make us really happy is something to be enthusiastic about." Thank you very much.